kind of paper called A Scale That Embodies Us. So you're there. Yeah, good.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so very different from mushrooms. But this, I'll just say again, I'm a PhD student at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and my master's was in food studies, but I also worked in media, which is how I came to this. But I'm kind of, this is more of an interest in how our senses can intervene where technology, and especially the technology of satellite imagery, has alienated us from our environment. So it kind of uses the corporeal senses in contrast to certain forms of technology. You know, and I focus on the Anthropocene, which is a fraught term, and I get into that in the paper a little bit, but generally, this is an epoch that's typified by scales that exceed us, you know, massive hyper objects that manifest and produce grotesque material realities beyond our control in the form of pollution and desertification. But these are really beyond the limits of our perception. It's an epoch that's more often defined by sheer scale, you know, planet-wide change and more than human impacts that stretch far into the future. And we don't really have any sensory contact with these realities. There is, you know, I like Lance Tuafard's articulation of, he discusses footage of oil spills, but I think it applies well to these kind of images of human impacts on Earth, which is that they kind of overwhelm and ultimately displace our subjectivity. And so I've looked a lot at these satellite and aerial images, and it does seem that there's kind of a chasm that separates the kind of consequences of ecological disaster and then what he calls the rather unremarkable images of this unhaltable progress. You know, we witnessed a crisis from which we have kind of been absented. There isn't any human scale in this image or in these images. This one in particular is where we see evidence of mankind's impact on Earth at a placidly inconceivable scale. This is agriculture in Saudi Arabia. It's kind of vibrant, beautiful textures, and it kind of keeps us at a remove in its sublime quality. And the issue with agriculture in Saudi Arabia generally is that they're pulling fossilized water, basically dating to the Ice Age, from underground to irrigate the farms, and it's really not sustainable and causing desertification. And I focus in this paper on agricultural images related to the Anthropocene because the agriculture is a proposed start date for the Anthropocene, and it definitely touches on, you know, the kind of temporalities of that epoch, but also because food production alone accounts for a staggering third of all greenhouse gas emissions. And these kind of views of agriculture at this scale are often breathtaking in their geometry and sort of kind of have this wink of like notions of progress and geoengineering. This is an image of a toxic pig lagoon. The bubblegum pink color is a bacteria breaking down pig waste. It almost has kind of like a pleasant aesthetic quality where we don't really see the real impacts of something like this. These lagoons can rupture and really pollute and toxify waterways and groundwater. And it kind of hints at a vibrant and uncontrollable materiality, but it's kind of contained within the aesthetically pleasing contours. This is another image of Saudi Arabian center pivot agriculture. It's a false color image, but it's similar. This is also an area where they're using that sort of like finite groundwater resource. And then these images from artist Miksha Henner, I also reference in the paper, which are composed satellite images of more toxic waste lagoons. This time it's on cattle farms, so concentrated animal feeding operations in Texas. And again, the color is depicted by different chemicals that they're using to try to break down the waste as it collects in the lagoon. And, you know, I think some of these images are only shocking because they concern the kind of normal running of the global sort of industrial agriculture system that is bringing disastrous effects on us. And sort of the routineness of it is almost what's the most shocking. And this is another quote that I reference, you know, the images are not true in of themselves, but do provide some truth in terms of our impotence in front of such images. And I get into a little bit how satellite imagery is often taken as just this objective truth, when in reality it's very carefully constructed, and how it's presented and the problems here in that. But I think generally these images become a spectacle that's kind of unmoored from the reality and the damage that they allude to. And the irony is that I think agriculture is particularly ironic because it's an otherwise related to a very deeply embodied and human scale action, which is eating. And so these images depict systems which provide us with this intimate substance, one that's ingested and incorporated into our body, yet we are experiencing it through this sort of disassociation. Guy Debord has, articulated that the spectacle presents itself as a vast, inaccessible reality that can never be questioned. And I think that definitely happens here, a kind of reciprocal alienation between the viewer and the landscapes. We're never going to know what a toxic pig farm lagoon smells like. Like we're never going to be able to smell or sense like the caked mud of a dried up aquifer. And so my question was sort of like, how might we reject the spatial irreconcilability of the Anthropocene and become more deeply engaged with its real? And I came to eating and taste and smell as ways to kind of touch these Anthropocene entanglements and really become more involved in them. I think the senses of taste and smell orient us away from this kind of ocular-centric visual experience and can establish more embodied contact with those landscapes. So again, referencing Haraway's situated and subjective realities as an important form of knowledge, and not just that objective kind of God's eye view of the satellite. And the body can then extend beyond the limits of kind of, visual fetishism and ocular-centric depictions of the agricultural Anthropocene. Sorry, I don't know why this is, there we go. Responses to taste and smell are very different from visual stimuli. They're powerful at eliciting physiological and behavioral responses. And, as opposed to complex thoughts, which can be verbalized, which might be a benefit. Like this is a kind of partial sensorial knowledge that is important in considering how we know toxic landscapes. And it's a connection to place through agricultural connections or ecological entanglements. So there are a series of videos and photos which took place at sites of human disturbance. And I decided to make a gesture linking my own consumption with agriculture and man-made disturbance in scales that could relate more to my body, to counteract that spectacle. Cooking and dining are very acute examples of human culture that are inevitably connected to extractive agricultural practices. And so dining is both a man-made construct and a deeply ecological endeavor. Like eating is one of the most intimate ways that we connect to the environment, no matter how far away it is. And this sort of suggests that domesticity has a place among an otherwise overwhelming epoch or abandoned kind of spaces left by industry, extraction, or urbanism. These have been called feral sites by Anna Tsang or ruderal sites by Bettina Stotzer and others. And they're the product of anthropogenic activity, but have fallen out of human use. This one in particular was Floyd Bennett Airfield in Queens, technically in New York, which was created by filling in a landfill at a place called Barren Island, which was on and off been radioactive. It's been the site of a lot of chemical dumping and factories, and it was a landfill that then wasn't capped properly and re-emerged. So this is what the beach looks like there. So it kind of becomes definitely a site to see the impact of mankind in the kind of Anthropocene way. And in this version, I consumed pasta with weedy forage pesto. And so the foods that I use kind of matter. They explicitly demonstrate a connection to agricultural transformations that are happening on a global scale. And so weed foraging is an important disengagement with the industrial food system and represents the importance of biodiversity and foraging as a way to engage with sites sort of as they are and not in a kind of extractive way. In this piece, I was consuming kelp, salad, and kombucha. Kelp and seaweed can act as a carbon sink without the inputs of fertilizer or water. And it is farming seaweed is a regenerative process, especially used when alongside bivalves. So it provides a way for us to also repurpose future coastlines made uninhabitable by sea level rise. There's a lot of great benefits to seaweed farming. And so I engage that in this space as a way to acknowledge some of these kind of radical transformations that would have to happen in order to reduce our carbon footprint. And, I think for me, the potent smell of a lot of these foods has an important affect. It kind of keeps me present both in the site as well as in the reality of agricultural processes. Doing these alone kind of was important as a way of listening to the space of my senses or having a private ritual. And it was a potential for kind of noticing and kind of sensing the smell of a place, what weeds were growing there, how the wind impacted them, how they grew through a fence, and really kind of paying close attention. And in the last one I'm sharing, I took care of and consumed mushrooms and sort of consumed them right off of the mycelium block that they were growing on. Mushrooms and fungi have been posited as remediation tools for cleaning toxic agricultural waste, providing a lower carbon footprint protein source. And again, they also represent decay and decomposition, which is an important part of a sort of circular and sustainable food economy. So I'll just skip ahead to the end here because we're almost out of time. But the point, I also been thinking about the Anthropocene as a temporal entity, and engaging these kind of sensory and material practices, in my opinion, helps me to make and co-create the Anthropocene time with landscapes and really engage with them on a way that is subjective. And I've been thinking a lot about techne, or practices and rituals that reinscribe reality over and over again. And cooking and eating following recipes are definitely ways to reify or assert different definitions of nature and relationships to what we call the Anthropocene and how we understand it in a sensory capacity. So yeah, thank you very much. And there we go.